Hey everybody, TacticAngel back on the PlayStation 5 to take a look at another premium ship in World Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at His Majesty's Canadian ship, Huron, a Tier 7 premium Commonwealth destroyer. Like usual, we'll start with some history, move into analysis, run down the stats, and then finish off with some gameplay. If you want to skip around though, check out the chapters in the description below. As for Huron's history, we've already talked about the tribal class destroyers in our Cossack and Haida videos, and being a fellow Canadian vessel, Huron spent a lot of her service alongside HMCS Haida. Huron was one of the initial 4 tribal class destroyers ordered by the Royal Canadian Navy and completed by the Vickers Armstrong shipyards in England, and including the 4 additional tribals completed by the Halifax shipyards in Canada itself, was one of 8 that saw service in the Royal Canadian Navy. Similar to other tribal class ships, she is named for the Huron tribe, or people, also known as the Wendat, which I am told means people of the peninsula. Which peninsula? Well, more or less the land between Windsor, which is Detroit's Canadian neighbor, and Ottawa, capital of Canada. Huron was laid down in July 1941, launched in June 1942, and was commissioned into service in July 1943. Since she was built on the other side of the pond, she made her trials near Scapa Flow, and like the great bulk of other Canadian ships, she'd get pretty quickly stuck into convoy duty in the North Sea, escorting supplies to Murmansk and Kola Inlet. Huron's early service saw a brief interruption between mid-October and mid-November following a collision with an oiler, but she was stuck back into it for convoys JW-54, RA-54, and more interestingly JW-55, during which other elements of the British Home Fleet rode out to take on and eventually sink the Scharnhorst. Though like her sister Haida, Huron maintained her escort duties. She'd get a few more trips across the North Sea before transferring down to Plymouth in February 1944 in preparation for Operation Neptune, better known as the Normandy landings. Before that could happen though, operating with fellow tribal class ships Haida, Ashanti, and Athabaskan, as well as HMS Black Prince, the cruiser detected a group of German Elbing-class torpedo boats at a range of about 19 miles. These were creatively named T-24, T-27, and T-29. In the battle that followed, the T-27 was hit and forced to run aground, while Huron and Athabaskan engaged T-29, eventually setting her ablaze and sinking the ship. Haida and Ashanti drove off T-24, which was damaged but would live to fight another day, and whose stray torpedo would take out Athabaskan. This marked the first destroyer kill for the Royal Canadian Navy. Not a first, though. Huron accidentally collided with Ashanti going back to port and would spend 2 weeks being repaired. That means she was back in more than enough time to participate in the Day of Days. Her specific duties on D-Day were to intercept any enemies headed for the transit route. After the 6th and 7th of June, she'd head west to block off any German advance from Brittany. They'd get a second bite at T-24 when it was again caught on radar alongside Z-32, Z-24, and ZH-1, which stands for Destroyer Holland 1, or 1. In this close quarters engagement, Z-32 was badly damaged by gunfire and had to run aground. ZH-1 was sunk by gunfire and a pair of torpedoes from HMS Ashanti, and the 2 24s were damaged but were able to withdraw. Huron's final actions in the Atlantic include diversionary actions and engaging German E-boats and minesweepers in July, with 2 suspected kills. After this, she'd spend about 6 months under refit. By the time she'd be back in the war, it's April 1945, and her service ends more or less how it began, escorting convoys to and from the Soviet Union. Granted, by June 1945, she was nominated to join the Pacific War, but that would involve refitting the ship to be more livable in tropical climates, as opposed to the North Sea. That refit seemed likely it would not happen fast enough to be completed before war's end, and they were right. The end of World War II was not the end of the Huron, though. She'd go into the reserve fleet for a time before being reactivated in 1950 as a training ship. When Korea decided to choose an economic system through trial by combat, that role changed, and instead Huron headed for Korea. She'd spend a lot of her time as part of a carrier screen alongside fellow Canadian Athabaskan, another tribal-class destroyer named for the first one lost during World War II, though she did have a few occasions to patrol the coastline of Korea, and in one such patrol captured a Chinese junk. This kind of ship, though not this ship, probably. After that war, Huron got a pretty major modernization, where her rear turret was replaced by a double squid anti-submarine mortar system, and she'd be rearmed with a uniform 4-inch suite of guns. With this and the other system upgrades, she was able to return to Korea in 1953 to, this time, keep the peace. After a 9-month tour, she returned to Canada to resume her role as a training ship until 1963, when she again passed into the reserve fleet. 2 years later, though, Huron was sold for scrap. That's pretty much the history of this ship. As far as Huron in game, she's the 4th version of a tribal class ship that we have. And it may not be wildly surprising to learn that since Cossack 38 doesn't play all that much like Cossack, well, Huron doesn't play much like Haida or Cossack, no matter which year you choose to compare it to. What the Huron does probably best is shooting things, which isn't that different than what the other tribals do. Thing is, you just do it a bit better, specifically in the fire starting and AP performance, even if the HE DPM isn't that much different. And she does this while being a bit faster and still reasonably concealed. To be fair, a lot of that is double dipping into Huron just having good consumables, which is a stronger sonar than her sisters, a double strength engine boost, and a heal that will help you recover at least a few thousand extra hit points between those gun battles. The downside for Huron is kind of the rest of the consumable situation though, which is really what you don't have: smoke. And this screen at least puts a big red circle for you to tell you all about that. Huron also just has 4 torpedoes with unimpressive range, which has always been a drawback for the tribals, and that situation is even worse on Huron, with slower, less damaging, and slower reloading torpedoes. It's also worth mentioning that as a Commonwealth destroyer, you don't have a lot of options for commanders. Waller may be a great pick for this ship, and probably the one that I would make, but he is a one-trick pony, so you really do need to like that pony if you're gonna like this ship. Now, this combination is going to present some challenges because not having smoke and only having 1 rack of torpedoes is going to limit some of your carry potential with this ship. Looking at it like that, you probably will want to get out there and drive some momentum for your team in the early game. But that's also the worst part of the game for destroyers that don't have a get out of jail free card to disengage behind smoke. That's also the time of the game where ships are most likely to be clustered and most able to provide fire support for their destroyers. As such, the people who are going to enjoy the Huron are folks who both already probably like one of the tribal class ships, but also like some of the other lines that don't have smoke, like the Pan-Europeans, possibly the French. Your commander selection does give you a little bit more rock'em sock'em opportunities to hang in there much longer than you'd expect a ship with this much hit points, and in a lot of ways you're behind the 8 ball even more in Huron than you are with any of her sister ships. But let's look a little bit deeper into that. As we jump into stats though, expect to hear more than a few comparisons to Haida, otherwise we'll talk about the ship as she compares to everybody else. First off, Huron comes with 17,700 hit points, which puts her just above the average for a tier 7 destroyer. Her armor is unremarkable. This 6 to 20 millimeters is by far the most common value for superstructure and hull, and I'm not going to count on that doing much for you, since almost everyone's going to be shooting HE anyway. The good news continues into the main battery, which is the familiar 3x2 arrangement of 120 millimeter guns. 2 forward and 1 aft. They share the same range as Haida and frankly most of the destroyers at this tier at 10.9 kilometers, with reload at just 4 seconds. This is a non-trivial half second faster than Haida. Your main battery does have a pretty unimpressive 1760 HE damage, which is 240 less than Haida, and that means that your DPM works out to be roughly similar to your sister, but that's still on the goodish side. You've also got the 7% fire chance, though, making you one of the better fire starters. Without a smoke to sit in, though, you might not have as many opportunities to use this as you'd like, and that's before even considering your 2,500 damage on AP shells. Now this number isn't incredible on its own, but it is 300 more than Haida, and combined with the better reload makes Huron actually the third best in potential AP DPM, behind the Friesland's fast-firing guns and Akizuki, which to be honest would require a relatively cooperative target in order to achieve anything like those DPM results. Like Haida though, you have a secondary gun too, in fact a twin turret, except now you have them at 5 kilometer range. I'll briefly mention in a minute that I would suggest turning off your AA in a lot of cases. That is going to turn this off as a secondary as well. So if you're doing something like that, you're going to need to remember to turn it back on if you want this gun to shoot, help you out a little bit. It's probably going to miss anyway, but just putting that out there for full disclosure. But before we talk about AA, we've got some torpedoes. Not much. Either a number or an effect. With 4 torpedoes in one launcher, you can launch them in single file, and that makes them a little bit more capable, but the 16,529 is not only random, but also unimpressive. The 96-second reload is 16 seconds longer than Haida, a pretty anemic 62 knot speed, and an unimpressive 8.3 kilometer range really constitute a parade of disappointment for a lot of destroyer players out there. When you add that all together, Huron is a contender for one of the worst torpedo boats at Tier 7, obviously behind Friesland with its 1 torpedo. When we get to AA, you have a 25 rating here, and that is the same as Haida. You end up with just a decent amount of short-range AA, but after 2.5 kilometers, you're adding just 17 overall damage per second, all the way out to 5 kilometers. That's towards the upper end of asking for a lot of trouble on a DD with this little AA, and maybe you don't want to invite the attention from the fun police at an extra 1.5 kilometers just to do an amount of damage that has virtually no chance of shooting anything down. Coming next to maneuverability, you may be surprised to learn that every one of these stats are the same as on Haida, and though I would tell you that Haida was more competitive in the speed department a year and a half ago, warships are entering the game that are faster than her rather than slower. And this number is pretty middling now and tending downwards, I suspect. 630 on the turning circle remains pretty good, and the rudder shift is just a hair better than average too. But we're going to make up some of the difference in the speed category in just a minute, so don't worry. But first we have to talk about concealment. You don't have the same concealment as Haida. Inconveniently, you're just 100 meters less concealed than your average DD, which means that if your Canadian buddy asks, "Yo, wanna 1v1 me, eh?" Haida would probably get the first shot, in most cases, thanks to her 300 meter sea detectability advantage. Nevertheless, the tribals have average detection by air, 3.5, and for some reason the Huron is 100 meters more visible while firing from smoke, but we'll say that is not very impactful overall, and even less as we talk about consumables, because I don't see smoke screen on this screen at all. What you do have is your standard damage control party, followed by a heal. Now this is a good thing in general, even if the numbers aren't all that incredible. 176 hit points per second is just shy of 1% of your health, and that lasts only 10 seconds. Don't get me wrong, if I'm missing any amount of hit points and someone offered me an extra 2,000, I take it, particularly if you let me say yes please a second time a short 80 seconds later. But this isn't a super heal in any way, shape, or form. You've got a speed boost, and this one actually is pretty nice. 3 charges, the speed boost gives you 15% more zoom for 2 minutes. That's almost double the zoom, even if it is a shorter duration than most. But again, you get 3 of them, and I'd argue that makes up for the minute that you're missing. There are very few ships where you wouldn't prefer this sort of engine boost. Similar to Haida, you also have sonar, and similar to your engine boost, the duration is pretty short, just 100 seconds here. The nice thing about this is the 4 kilometer range for detecting enemy ships. There are still plenty of ships out there that will out sonar you, but 4 kilometers is a 400 meter improvement over Haida and helps you deal with those people who run acquisition mod a lot more comfortably. The extra 500 meters for detecting torpedoes is also going to give you 20% more reaction time, which, unless you overthink things in the course of half a second, is probably only an advantage. All right, and as we get into some gameplay, we're going to be on Land of Fire. And as we jump into battle, I will go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. I am doing this the traditional way, which is trying to play the Huron as a standard destroyer. That means I've chosen to have some more hit points. I've chosen to have some more speed and extra concealment. We've also got concealment in rank 2. We do have Scrap Iron Flotilla in slot 4, which is the only thing that some of you are going to agree with. But other than that, we're going to keep our engine going, and we're just going to see how this plays as a standard destroyer. What a lot of people are going to recommend you do with this is play the so-called zombie build, which means that you do take Scrap Iron Flotilla, and then you stack on top of that Steadfast Soldier, and rather than these inspirations, you're just going to go for damage reduction, and particularly scaling damage reduction, which basically means that as you get pretty low hit points, you're going to be taking less and less damage per shot, and it becomes actually kind of a real pain to kill you with most destroyers, as long as they can stay within the Steadfast Soldier range where they're getting an automatic heal. Then inevitably you kill them, and then you hit your heal, and hopefully you gain back enough stuff that you can do it again to somebody else. I mean, it's an interesting idea, but it seems to be one of those try-hard things that just seems ungentlemanly. And with the way that the Sailing Robin looked at Final Boss with just a disappointment, let's say, that was his favorite thing of the entire year. I'm not 100% sure how long that combination is going to really stick around. So I'm going to play this just normal and see how it goes. That does mean, as a destroyer that doesn't have a smoke, I'm a little bit limited in terms of my options. You saw that we were kind of eyeing up a Bismarck over there and trying to figure where he was going to go based on how he was maneuvering around those islands. We do have relatively short-range torpedoes, and we only have one set of them. Generally speaking, they're not super useful unless somebody is driving perpendicular or towards you. Hopeful noises. And at this point, we've taken a big chunk out of Bismarck, but you can see he is within 8 kilometers of us. And that's a Bismarck B, which means it has even more secondaries than the standard Bismarck. It has less AA, so he's probably a little bit upset that there is a carrier. But at this range, I probably don't want to shoot at him because he's probably going to shoot me 100 times back. Now that we have C, we're going to look towards the middle because we saw a destroyer. And if there's one thing that I like to do, possibly two, I think Benedrick said it best.
All Tactic likes to do is go hunt down destroyers too, which I'm not saying I blame him. That is a good thing to do.
So we're driving towards B, hoping that whatever was over there is still over there. If you were paying attention to how it was looking around and driving absent-mindedly at the beginning of the game, I'd probably know that that was a Jaeger if I had been paying any attention, but I wasn't, and that's just how it goes. Now, I don't like fighting Jaegers, even in a gunboat, because they can't shoot enough torpedoes at you that it makes it pretty hard to dodge. And now I'm just trying to gauge how this guy's going to drive next to this island. And I think he was kind of laying low, hoping to lose his spot. And then I drove straight into, you know, my own spotting area because, again, perfect situational awareness. There are torpedoes directly to my front. I disagree with how much that's the front of my ship. But in the meantime, we do manage to blow up the Jaeger and then turn in between some torpedoes. That one was a little bit more intentional. At least I was aware of where they were. Now we've enacted part 2 of our plan, which is to cap a second base. We're checking out the different angles. I'm kind of hoping that this Colorado is cooperative and decides that he wants to challenge B. If he challenges B, then there's at least a chance I'll get to use my torpedoes again. Otherwise, you are, again, a destroyer with really good guns, no smoke, and really disappointing torpedoes. He's driving away, and we all know how slow that ship is, and I cannot even hit him. I'm not going to shoot him because I value my stealth, because I don't particularly want people to know where those 4 torpedoes are coming from if I do get the chance to use them. Instead, we'll look over at A. Wait a minute. That destroyer seems to be pretty close to our carrier, and also destroyers are one of those things that I like to do. So we're going to throw on the speed as best as possible and go out towards the lightning. Since we do have our carrier on the line, I'm probably not going to wait until I'm extremely close to open fire. You can kind of see that the rear turret angle is not great though, and it would be nice to be able to just drive straight at this guy a little bit longer. I think he might be slowing down because he lost an engine there. It looks like we're a little bit behind him in terms of our overall aim. Now, I could be shooting AP at him. It would probably do a decent amount of damage. I typically only use the AP inside of 5 kilometers. At this range, particularly how I'm shooting, I'm afraid it might bounce. But the AP can do pretty good damage if you can actually land them consistently where you want them to go. He's maneuvering, driving away from us, and we're not particularly fast. We've managed to barely catch up this entire time, and we probably didn't need to do a fantastic job in order to save the carrier, but we'd have to do a better job than that. We do eventually win, though. It looks like he launched all of his torpedoes in front of us. We activated our sonar somewhere in the middle of that. Mostly, there's no point in hitting it right away unless you really, really think that the guy was going to blind fire you. You can probably give it 5 or 10 seconds at the very least to let him react to you before using it, just to get the most out of the duration. Now we've got the Nagato trying to cap a base. We would really love it if our shells got there in time to decap him, but just fractionally too late. Since we're already shooting and we've got a natural loss of spot here in a second, we're going to keep the guns going. Hope to get a fire. There we go. And then move in towards our third cap. Now this is the workhorse portion of being a destroyer player, and basically we don't have a whole lot to do or really talk about as we sail into A and start to take it. You can see that the Nagato is just not real interested in being anywhere close to me, and we're trying to sail towards the back part of A to get the best angle just in case he swings back. It doesn't look like he's super interested in that, and it does also look like he is going to defeat our battleship. Just hit points wise, it's not looking real good. In spite of the extra knot that we got out of our inspiration and the speed flag and all of that. You can tell this ship is still not incredibly fast. I could have probably made that a little bit better after we capped the base and hit one of those speed boosts. I really like the speed boost on this. It's twice as good as your average speed boost, and I like that I get 3 of them instead of 2. But you know, your base speed might be slow enough that it doesn't do much for you. Now, we've started shooting at Nagato because there's not a lot of reason not to. We know that the Colorado is going to be somewhere in this area, and we're going to continue shooting just to see if we can't get a second fire, which obviously we did. He burns to death. And now it's a 1v1. The game was over before I started shooting at him. There wasn't really a risk that he was going to kill me expediently. But that said, I am a little bit aware that I'm not just trying to have a good game. And I'm not just trying to inflate my leaderboard scores while I'm reviewing a ship. So I decide to do the smart thing, turn away until we can start getting better eyes on the cap, assuming that he might cross close to the corner of that island. That's really the one way that he's going to win, by basically loading 16-inch HE, coming around the corner. He spots me if I'm feeling way too confident, and then things can happen pretty quickly from there, and then you've suddenly lost the game. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to play against that, but it looks like he chose the safer option also, which is fine. It was a low percentage play anyway, but if you're really committed to winning, your route is on the inside, and so the game ticks down to a victory. But since the game's over, I guess it's time for my closing thoughts. As far as Huron goes, it's a pretty potent gunship, which is always going to appeal to me. If you want something that can actually reliably torpedo another ship, then it's obviously a pretty bad choice. I play Swedish destroyers much more than most people would find reasonable, so I usually know how to behave myself around groups of other ships, and that's really what you have to do if you don't have a smoke. I do think Huron's a little bit rough because you do have to kind of make your play early in the game when everyone's likely to be paying attention and willing to shoot at you, and for that matter, alive. And then when you don't have a smoke, it leaves you with less opportunities to carry in most cases. That makes Haida probably a better choice for most people, and even if I do like this kind of challenge, I still prefer Haida too. I do like the high fire starting chance if you get an opportunity to just pick on somebody who's not paying attention to you, and you can play the zombie build in either one. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. It's what a lot of people do, and it's something you need to take into consideration if you come up against one. You need to kill it, and you need to get your friends to kill it quick. But that's pretty much all I've got to say about Huron. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and as always, I'll see you on the next one.